The audience was settling in for another heartwarming episode of The Ellen Show, when Ellen made an announcement that caught everyone off guard. She wasn't introducing a celebrity guest or revealing a surprise giveaway. Instead, she was talking about a woman who had spent 23 years doing something that most people thought was impossible. "Ladies and gentlemen," Ellen said, her voice carrying that special tone reserved for the most meaningful moments, "I want you to meet someone who has redefined what family means, someone who looks at the children others call difficult and sees only children who need more love." What Ellen didn't tell the audience was that she had been moved to tears during the pre-interview. She'd met countless inspiring people over the years, but Patricia Williams had left her speechless with a simple statement: "I don't take the easy kids, Ellen. I take the ones nobody else wants." It was a statement that would challenge everything the audience thought they knew about motherhood, family, and what it means to choose love over convenience. The story behind Patricia's appearance on the show began 3 months earlier, when a social worker named Janet Phillips had written a letter to Ellen's production team. Janet had worked in the foster care system for 15 years, and in all that time she'd never encountered anyone quite like Patricia Williams. "This woman has taken children that experienced caseworkers have labeled hopeless," Janet had written. "She takes teenagers who have been through 8, 9, sometimes 10 foster homes, kids who steal, who run away, who have been so damaged by the system that most people have given up on them, and somehow Patricia finds a way to reach them." The letter had included dozens of testimonials from former foster children, social workers, and even judges who had witnessed Patricia's unique approach to healing broken children. One judge had written, "In my 20 years on the family court bench, I have never seen anything like what Patricia Williams accomplishes. She doesn't just provide shelter, she provides hope." Ellen's research team had spent weeks investigating Patricia's story, interviewing former foster children who were now successful adults, talking to neighbors who had watched teenager after teenager transform in Patricia's care, and reviewing case files that documented what could only be described as miraculous turnarounds. What they discovered was a woman who had developed an almost supernatural ability to see potential where others saw only problems. Patricia had a waiting list of social workers from across 3 counties who specifically requested her for their most challenging cases: the teenagers aging out of the system with nowhere to go, the kids who had been labeled unadoptable, the ones who carried such deep trauma that most foster families returned them within weeks. Patricia Williams sat in the green room, her hands folded in her lap, still not quite believing she was about to appear on national television. At 58, she had graying hair, laugh lines earned through years of joy and worry, and the kind of steady presence that made teenagers feel safe enough to trust her with their deepest fears. She thought about the 2 teenagers currently in her care: 17-year-old Jasmine, who had been trafficked and carried scars both visible and invisible, and 16-year-old Anthony, who had spent most of his childhood in juvenile detention facilities. Both had been deemed too challenging for traditional foster care, but Patricia saw something different when she looked at them. She saw resilience that had been mistaken for rebellion, strength that had been mislabeled as defiance. The call from Ellen's producers had come 3 weeks earlier, after Patricia's story had appeared in a local newspaper. The article had been titled, "The Woman Who Says Yes When Everyone Else Says No," and it had captured the attention of someone on Ellen's research team who understood that some stories needed to be shared with the world. For 23 years, Patricia had been a therapeutic foster mother, but not the kind most people imagined. While other foster families requested babies or young children, Patricia specialized in taking teenagers, specifically the ones with behavioral problems, trauma histories, and reputations that made social workers sigh with exhaustion. Her home had become legendary in social services circles, a last resort that somehow became a first chance for children everyone else had written off. Patricia had turned her modest 4-bedroom house into a sanctuary, with rooms that had witnessed miraculous transformations: angry, violent teenagers learning to trust again, children who had never experienced unconditional love discovering that they were worthy of it. "The easy kids find families," Patricia had told the reporter. "The difficult ones just find more rejection. But here's the thing, there are no difficult children. There are only children who've been through difficult things." The philosophy hadn't come easily. Patricia's first few years of fostering had been brutal, filled with moments when she questioned her sanity, her methods, and her ability to make a difference. She had endured death threats from teenagers who had learned to attack before they could be abandoned. She had replaced broken windows, repaired holes punched in walls during rage episodes, and spent countless nights sitting outside locked bedroom doors, talking to children who refused to come out. But somewhere in those early struggles, Patricia had discovered a truth that would guide her for the next 2 decades. The children who acted out the most were usually the ones who had been hurt the deepest. Their anger wasn't character defect, it was a survival mechanism, a way of protecting themselves from further disappointment. As Ellen introduced her to the audience, Patricia walked onto the stage with the quiet confidence of someone who had weathered countless storms and learned to find peace in the eye of each one. "Patricia," Ellen said once they were both seated, "I have to ask you something that might sound strange. Most people, when they think about foster care or adoption, they picture babies or young children, but you specifically ask for teenagers. Why?" Patricia smiled, the kind of smile that held years of hard-won wisdom. "Ellen, I started fostering when I was 35. My husband and I couldn't have biological children, and we thought we'd adopt a baby. But when we went to the agency, they told us about a 15-year-old girl named Michelle, who had been in the system for 8 years. She'd been returned by 4 different families." Ellen leaned forward. "Returned? That's what they call it when foster families decide they can't handle a child anymore," Patricia explained. "Michelle had been returned because she had behavioral issues. She stole food and hid it in her room. She had nightmares and would wake up screaming. She didn't trust adults." Patricia paused, remembering. "But when I met Michelle, all I saw was a scared little girl who had learned that the people who were supposed to protect her would eventually send her away. So I asked myself, what if someone just decided not to send her away?" The studio was completely quiet. Ellen could feel the audience holding their breath, waiting to hear what happened next. "What did happen with Michelle?" Ellen asked gently. Patricia's eyes brightened. "It took 2 years of her testing every boundary, every promise I made. She ran away 6 times. She broke things when she was angry. She told me she hated me at least once a week. But you know what? I just kept being there. I kept saying, 'This is your home and I'm not going anywhere.'" Ellen felt tears pricking her eyes. And one day she stopped running. She stopped breaking things. And she started calling me Mom. Patricia's voice caught slightly. "Michelle is 38 now. She's a social worker herself, helping kids who remind her of who she used to be. She's married, has 2 children and calls me every Sunday." The audience began to respond with gentle applause, but Ellen held up her hand. She could sense there was more to this story. "Patricia, Michelle wasn't the only one, was she?" Patricia shook her head. "Over 23 years, I've fostered 47 children, all of them teenagers, all of them considered difficult or unadoptable by the system." The number hit the audience like a physical force. 47 children. 47 young people who had been written off by society, given a chance by one woman who refused to see them as lost causes. 47, Ellen repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "Patricia, that's not a hobby, that's a calling, that's a life dedicated to proving that every child deserves love." Patricia nodded. "Ellen, people ask me all the time how I do it, how I deal with the anger, the trauma, the behavioral problems, but they're asking the wrong question. The question isn't how I deal with difficult children. The question is, how does our society create children who have learned that they're too difficult to love?" Ellen stood up and addressed the camera directly. "Ladies and gentlemen, what Patricia is telling us challenges everything we think we know about family. She's not just fostering children. She's proving that love doesn't see behavioral problems or trauma histories. Love sees potential." Ellen turned back to Patricia. "I have to ask, and I hope this isn't too personal, but this must have been incredibly challenging. How did you keep going through the difficult times?" Patricia thought for a moment. "Every child who comes to me has been told, in one way or another, that they're not worth keeping. My job isn't to fix them or change them. My job is to love them exactly as they are until they can see themselves the way I see them." She paused, looking out at the audience. "And here's what I've learned. When you love someone unconditionally, when you refuse to give up on them no matter what they do, they start to believe they're worth loving. And once they believe that, everything changes." Ellen reached into her jacket and pulled out a tissue, dabbing at her eyes. "Patricia, I have something to tell you. We reached out to some of your kids, your former foster children, and several of them wanted to be here today." Patricia's eyes went wide. "What do you mean?" That's when Ellen made a gesture to her production team, and from backstage came a parade of adults, men and women in their 20s, 30s, and 40s, all walking onto the stage with expressions of pure love and gratitude. Patricia gasped, covering her mouth with both hands as she recognized face after face. There was Michelle, now a successful social worker. There was Marcus, who had arrived at Patricia's house at 17 with a juvenile record and now owned a small business. There was Sarah, who had been aging out of the foster system with nowhere to go and now worked as a nurse. But it was the youngest member of the group who provided the moment that would define everything. 18-year-old David, who had been living with Patricia for the past 3 years, stepped forward. "Mom," he said, his voice carrying across the silent studio, "I wrote something for you." Patricia was crying now, overwhelmed by seeing so many of her children together in one place. David pulled out a folded piece of paper and began to read. "Dear Mom, and yes, I call you Mom because that's what you are. When I came to you, I was 15 and had been in 12 different homes. I was angry, scared, and convinced that I was unlovable. Everyone else saw a problem kid. You saw a kid with problems who needed love." David's voice grew stronger as he continued. "You didn't try to fix me. You didn't give up when I tested every boundary. You just loved me, and because you loved me when I couldn't love myself, I learned that I was worth loving." The audience was openly crying now, but David wasn't finished. "All of us standing here today are proof that families aren't just made by blood. They're made by choice, by someone who chooses to love you not in spite of your flaws, but because of everything that makes you who you are." Patricia stood up and embraced David, then opened her arms to include all the other adults who had once been broken teenagers in her care. The group hug that followed wasn't just a touching television moment, it was a family reunion, a testament to the power of unconditional love. Ellen waited for the emotional moment to settle before speaking. "Patricia, this is incredible, but I have to ask, you're 58 years old. Are you still fostering?" Patricia wiped her eyes and smiled. "I have 2 teenagers with me right now, and as long as there are kids who need a home, I'll keep opening my door." Ellen stood up and addressed the camera once more. This woman has spent 23 years proving that there are no throwaway children, that every teenager, no matter how angry or hurt or difficult they seem, is someone's future success story if they just get the love they deserve. Ellen turned back to Patricia. "I have something for you. The Ellen DeGeneres Foundation wants to help expand what you're doing. We're funding a renovation of your home so you can take in more children, and we're establishing a training program so other families can learn to foster older children using your methods." Patricia stared at Ellen in shock. "You're serious?" "Completely serious, because what you've shown us today is that love isn't about finding the perfect child. It's about being the perfect parent for the child who needs you most." But Ellen had one more surprise. Marcus, the former foster child who now owned a business, stepped forward. "Mom," he said, "we all got together and decided we wanted to do something for you too. All 47 of us, the ones who are here and the ones who couldn't make it. We pooled our money together." He handed Patricia an envelope. "It's not much compared to what you've given us, but we wanted you to know that everything good in our lives started with you believing in us." Patricia opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a check for $50,000 and a letter signed by all 47 of her former foster children, thanking her for showing them what unconditional love looked like. "We know you'll probably spend this on the kids you have now," Michelle added with a laugh, "but that's exactly why you deserve it." Ellen watched this exchange with tears streaming down her face. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is what family looks like. Not just the traditional version we see in movies, but the kind of family that's built by choice, by commitment, by someone who refuses to give up." As the show continued, Ellen made an announcement that would change the trajectory of her platform. "Starting next month, we're launching a series called The Families We Choose, highlighting people like Patricia who are redefining what family means. Because what we've learned today is that love doesn't require DNA. It just requires someone willing to see potential where others see problems." After the cameras stopped rolling, Patricia remained on stage surrounded by her grown children, marveling at how a decision she'd made 23 years ago to love one difficult teenager had grown into this extended family of successful, loving adults. Ellen joined the group, no longer the host but simply another person moved by the power of what she'd witnessed. "Patricia," Ellen said quietly, "how do you do it? How do you look at a hungry, traumatized teenager and see possibility?" Patricia thought for a moment, then answered with the wisdom that comes from decades of choosing love over fear. "Ellen, I think every child comes into this world expecting to be loved. When they act out, when they push boundaries, when they seem difficult, they're not being bad kids. They're being kids who are testing whether this time will be different, whether this time someone will love them enough to stay." She gestured to the adults around her. "My job was never to change them. My job was just to stay, to prove that they were worth staying for. And once they believed that about themselves, they changed themselves. Today, Patricia Williams continues to foster teenagers in her expanded home. She's also become a consultant for other foster families, teaching them that the most difficult children often become the most remarkable adults when given unconditional love and support. The Families We Choose series became one of Ellen's most popular segments, featuring adoptive families, chosen families, and people like Patricia, who prove that love creates family bonds stronger than any biological connection. Michelle, Patricia's first foster daughter, now works as a director at a youth services agency, using her own experience to help place older children in loving homes. She keeps a photo on her desk from that day on Ellen's show, not just of herself but of all 47 siblings she gained through Patricia's open heart. The lesson Patricia taught millions of viewers that day was revolutionary in its simplicity. There are no difficult children, only children who have been through difficult things. Love doesn't see behavioral problems or trauma histories. Love sees potential, possibility, and the promise that every child carries within them. Because when someone chooses to love the children others call difficult, they're not just changing those children's lives. They're proving that family isn't about finding the perfect child, it's about being the perfect parent for the child who needs you most. That's not just foster care. That's faith in human potential. That's what happens when someone decides that every child deserves to be someone's choice, not someone's burden. And sometimes when that choice is made 47 times over 23 years, it creates not just a family but a legacy of love that ripples out into the world, proving that the most beautiful families are often the ones that were built by choice, sustained by commitment, and defined by the radical belief that every child is worth keeping.